I'm going to demonstrate the use of absolute and relative references because knowing how to use absolute and relative references in your formulas is critical for being able to use Excel well. And so there are 4 different ways of copying, referring to a cell in a formula. The very first one here in H2 equals C2, just plain reference to the cell in this formula. So it's referring back to this cell, and in fact if I change this cell to something else like 250, then notice that that changes. In fact, notice that they all change. These are all ways of, in a formula with an equal sign, referring to a cell. So this one uses just a plain equals C2, and that's what we call a relative reference. And by relative, we mean that when you copy that cell, the location being copied is relative to the location of this cell you're copying into. All right, that's a mouthful. Let me demonstrate what that means. If I take this cell H2 and I copy it to the right, notice that what it copies is not the 250, but what's in the next cell. So it's a relative position. C2 is relative to H2, D2 is relative to I2, so on and so forth. And if I copy these down, it will continue to copy. Notice it does 1 through 15. Okay, that's what a relative reference does for you. Okay, so let's get rid of that. And let's change this to something else. Let's see, I had a fish up there initially. We'll go back to fish. This one right here, H8, and I'm using various things, numbers and text, just to show that this works regardless of what you're doing it with. If we go to H8, notice that I've used a $ before the column C, so it's my formula is equal $C and then the row, which is 2. Now this is a form of an absolute reference. In fact, all 3 of the remaining ones are forms of absolute references. So now let's see what happens. So if I copy this to the right, notice that it copies the fish, what's in C2, to the right. So that is absolute. It's fixed on the column C. That's what absolute means, as opposed to relative, where it moves when you copy it over. But now I only had the absolute portion on the C, right? The column, $C. So that when I take these and I copy them down, notice that what's copied, it's still a relative reference to the row, okay? So that's another way of doing it. Now let's put something in here like equals 9 times 5. Okay, so we have our answer there. The answer is copied to each of these locations. The third example uses the relative reference for the column and the absolute reference for the row. So it's equals C $2. And when I copy that to the right, notice that the column itself is relative, so it copies the 1, 2, and 3, not the 45. But when I copy it down, notice that it copies whatever's in that row, because the row was absolute with the $. Another way of thinking about it is the row was fixed with that $, fixed to row 2. It copied down 45, 1, 2, 3 in every one of the rows. So that's a third way of doing it. And then the final way of doing it is using the $ before both the column and the row, which will fix those values. So in this case, it is fixed on an exact cell because both the column and the row is fixed. So when I copy this over, notice that the 45 is copied over, and when I copy it down, notice that the 45 is copied down. So I'm going to put the rest of these back here so you can compare those to look at the differences in how those things are copied. So the point here is you can speed up your creation of models, mathematical models, as you're building your spreadsheets by knowing how to use relative and absolute references. And you have to decide, Do I need it fixed in the column? Do I need it fixed in the row? Do I need it fixed in both the column and the row? Or do I want a pure relative reference? And experiment with this and figure out how to use it. It will allow you to use Excel more effectively.